I am Jeff Foxworthy, and welcome to Gamekeeper Podcast. If you want to learn more about farming for wildlife and habitat management, then, buddy, you are in the right place. Join the Gamekeeper crew direct from Mossy Oak Land Enhancement Studio as they discuss the latest wildlife and habitat management practices, news, and, of course, hunting. There's no telling what you'll learn, but I'm going to tell you, I bet it's interesting. Enjoy.
Let's get this party started in 3, 2, 1.
Hey,
You know
good
what? That's
air.
that was pretty good.
improvising.
Did
by
we
Dudley.
record that?
Demonstrating leadership.
Yeah.
Not you, Dudley. Well, so welcome
It
everybody.
looked like it felt good, Dudley. I'm
Yeah,
just
it
looking
did.
at you.
It
I
did.
can tell, yeah.
Yeah, West Point, Mississippi. Welcome everybody. We got another podcast. We're going to learn a lot today, Lanny.
Yes. Going to learn about soybeans.
We are
Oh, yeah.
You know, because deer season starts when?
right now.
Now. It's always deer season's right.
Toxie says they're the Holy Grail.
Yeah. I mean,
I mean, for growing big deer.
there's a lot of good stuff, but, you know, and it's not as easy. That's why we have the best on today.
Yeah.
But, boy, I thought about this morning, just doing some work and thinking about the podcast, and it's like, I cannot tell you how many, maybe hundreds of times now, like here or like, you know, where we hunt in Alabama or somewhere, and somebody will show a picture or show up with a really big deer, a lot of mass and stuff in the back. And I said, I will guarantee you that deer had access to soybeans this summer. I guarantee you. And every time they're like, no. Oh, yeah, wait a minute. Yeah, it isn't but about a quarter mile over there. Or, you know, they'll go for miles to migrate to be able to eat them in the summertime.
Yeah, and how many times have you heard, man, that area used to be so good when they farmed
Yeah.
beans around there?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, every time I call the farmer up by Conan, he says, no, I'm not planting beans. I'm like, come on, man, work with me here.
Yeah, we'll get into it.
Yeah.
But there's the, you know, today is just, it's tough with either overpopulated or hogs, God forbid,
Yeah,
and all.
yeah.
But man, there's nothing I know of that you got that kind of nutrition from the foliage. And then like something even beyond that, you know, protein wise and in a different element or different type of nutrition in the actual beans when they
In
can
the
eat.
pod.
Because like even today, one of the best like feed things you can give your critters, turkeys, deer, everything is the roasted soybeans.
Yeah.
No
that's right.
question in my mind.
Yeah,
Hey, and speaking of the best, we got Nutrien Ag Solutions now.
We
with
do.
us.
we do. Thank you, Lanny.
Yes.
It's a great segue.
Well, you know, that's what I'm here for, Bobby.
We've got a partner, Nutrien Ag Solutions. We're so proud of them. They're great people.
Yeah,
They
and
are.
we got
They
these
are.
resources like we're going to have Tim today. They can answer all our questions.
That was one of the main reasons we wanted to get them on is or have them as a partner because they could help us all be better
Yeah.
wildlife
Because it is
farmers.
not easy sometimes.
No, and the convergence of wildlife management and agriculture. I mean, it's
Yep.
Here
this
we
is
are.
real as it gets.
Yeah. So let's introduce him. So
All right.
through the magic of Richie's efforts, we have Mr. Tim Sickman on. He's from Nutrien, and I think you're in Kentucky, right?
Yeah, Owensboro, Kentucky.
Owensboro.
About 2 hours west of Louisville, Kentucky, downstream on the Ohio River.
So
That's big deer
I have
country.
I used to be a pretty good friend of mine. I knew, did some stuff. I went to a couple of games in his box over there, but Rick Stansberry used to be our basketball coach here, and he's from Owensboro, Kentucky, and I think he's back there now. I hear he had some health issues and retired from coaching, but he's a family's a big landowner there too. Okay. So anyway, yeah.
We've bred some good basketball players, and as you guys know, you're probably fans of NASCAR. We've had some past celebrities, the Waltrip brothers, the Green brothers, Jeremy Mayfield in the day, all hail from the Owensboro area.
Wow.
Man.
Those guys.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Tim, feel free to join in here. We're going to. Lanny always gives us a current event that's going on.
Yeah, this one has to do, of course, it's turkey season. We all love turkey season. But interesting enough, South Carolina banned reaping and all hunting of jakes recently. So it's interesting. Yeah.
How did they define reaping?
Yeah. Let's see. So the new regulation, I'm going to read it right here from Field to Stream. The new regulations ban reaping on all private lands. They don't prohibit the similar practice of fanning, which is interesting. Reaping is when you are moving towards and stalking a wild turkey behind a decoy or tail fan. And then fanning is defined as hunting from a stationary position while holding or using a fan or decoy for concealment. and it's 100% legal to use any time a turkey decoy placed away from the hunter in South Carolina. So it's interesting, a little bit of gray area right there. Fanning and reaping have been outlawed on public land since 2020. So this is a new rule that's going to be applying to private lands. Also the Jake rule, where you're not able to harvest jakes, which I think from what this article says, met some challenges, but they got it on through. So interesting new legislature and laws about in relation to turkeys.
Well, and I think it'll go a long way toward helping people be safe.
Yes.
Some of that stuff just doesn't appear to be safe.
It is. I mean, obviously on public land, but on private land it gets rough too because people don't necessarily know where they are. Walking around, fanning, walking around with decoys, I mean, is dangerous. It just is.
Just because something's legal.
Yeah. I mean, think about
if it's unsafe, you can choose not to do that.
Yeah. Would you pick up a deer decoy and walk around during deer season?
Not around you.
And I wouldn't want one right in front of me when I was hunting. When I was a kid, I had a neighbor walk up and draw his shotgun on me on a hen decoy.
On a hen decoy, yeah.
Right in front of me. And I just haven't used one since. Safety first.
Hunting public land as much as I have multiple encounters. Not even using decoys, people sneaking in on calling and everything else. So
yeah. Good. That's a good one. So guys,
interesting enough. Yeah.
The spring edition is
the
out.
turkey stamp issue.
And I wanted to point that out, guys.
I'm sorry for jumping ahead of you.
No, the turkey stamp is out.
That's
so
right.
guys can go to, I think, just mossyoak.com, maybe to the store or something.
Yeah.
But now you can get guys love collecting these things. All the money goes back to Gamekeeper grants.
Yeah, there's some articles on mossyoak.com about what we're doing with some of those funds. So super excited to try to be to affect the future.
Yeah, Toxie, you got your stamp yet?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, of course. Don't mail a letter with that thing.
Yeah.
That'd be okay. But people that buy those stamps can do whatever they want to.
That's right.
Yeah. It all goes to a great cause.
Buy a whole sleeve of them. That'd be awesome.
They're very
a great
collectible.
Cause. Yes, they are.
Yeah, Bobby was telling me one time he sent a self-addressed stamped envelope to somebody in Africa, and they responded, and they were like, "I can't use these stamps, but I'll send it to you anyway."
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's a long story.
My
hero, Peter Capstan.
Oh, I knew this.
I wrote him a letter one time. So guys,
did he get it?
He did. He got it. He sent me back a signed picture hanging in my
elephant
wall.
hair or something.
And he's sitting around a campfire.
Hi, Bob.
I love Peter Capstan.
The deadly seven.
I think it may be, but now it's changed to 5.
Is it 5?
But back when Death in the Long Grass.
Death in the Long Grass was a book. I actually read it.
All right, let's move on. All right, Tim, we want you to teach us, educate us. Soybeans are so complicated, seem so complicated, but they can't be. But we know that deer love to eat them. What is it about them that make them such good forage for whitetails?
Well, two things I think stand out when you think about soybeans, and obviously hundreds of thousands of millions of deer can't be wrong because they've been walking into soybean fields ever since soybeans became a major crop, starting back in about the 1950s, and ever since. And anybody who raises them commercially in areas where there's a substantial deer population knows they love them. But I think first and foremost, you have to look at the inherent protein content of soybeans. Soybeans at maturity, the seed will range anywhere from 35 to 45% protein. If you want to draw the average nationally, that's around 40%. That is a lot of protein. As you fellas know, protein has a good bit to do with antler development and growth. And so when you talk about those big deer with those massive racks, and you were earlier talking about, tying that back to soybeans being in proximity to where those bucks are seen and observed and harvested, speaks volumes to what the protein does. The other thing about soybeans, especially during the growing season when they're in vegetative stage, is they're low in fiber. So they're high in protein, low in fiber, and that means they're very readily digestible by deer and a lot of other animals. They're very palatable. So it's not just a matter of intake, but it's an intake that is quickly converted over to into muscle mass and antler growth and so forth. So protein, fiber, and then of course, if you talk about soybeans in the fall and winter, if they manage to develop seed, the seed is also very high in energy content, 20% oil. And it's in the oil that we find the energy. So a great energy source for deer as well. It's really a good, complete, broad spectrum diet for them and a lot of other animals.
I like them too.
Yeah. You're a tofu kind of guy, aren't you?
I mean, when I was a kid
There
and
you
we were walking around rabbit hunting, I would pick the beans off the stalk and eat them while we were walking around.
So that's what happened to you.
I've seen
so.
Dudley eat a lot of questionables.
So yeah, for the purpose of the primary thing to talk about, we'd love to know everything we can glean from you on soybeans.
That would be 5 episodes.
Yeah. But I really want to, because there's so much potential for the wildlife farmer, the gamekeeper guy, and there's so many pitfalls of trying to. I mean, we can go list a bunch of them, but maybe they don't have all the best equipment and the budget necessarily either. And helping that guy understand the bare basics, especially when you give us, I think we can find from you there's some essentials to establishing them properly that guy may just leave out or not even know about, So I just want to be sure we don't forget that part of the conversation. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I'm speaking for myself because I would love to be able to do even in some of these smaller plots and stuff. And I know that's going to involve, there's no way around our buddies at Gallagher and like protecting them with something, especially like electric fence works great. But anyway, that's what I'd really love to know because, it's not one of those.
You're talking about like broadcasting.
Yeah, it may be, or maybe you've got some other ways to plant. But I mean, just in general, what he would recommend.
Yeah, I think when we think of establishing wildlife food plots, most folks are going to have to put seed out by some broadcast means, whether they're doing that with a hand crank spreader or they've got an electric powered spreader behind an ATV side by side. That's, what most people are going to have access to. And we can still be very, very successful with that. I think number one, with soybeans, and it pertains to a lot of other species we might plant in a wildlife or game management plot, and that is seedbed preparation. With soybeans, we're going to have to start with some type of tillage and get the soil worked up. Doesn't have to necessarily be worked up deeply. 2 or 3 inches would be sufficient. So if a fella has access to a small tractor and a PTO powered tiller, for example, going out and working up your plot with something like that would be ideal to get that soil pulverized, break down any big clods that are out there. You could do it with a small disc as well, but a power tiller probably will help condition that soil a little bit better. But the number one thing is you have to get a good seed bed established, and it can't be too dominated by big clods. You need to get that those soil particles worked down, and then if you go out after you've got your soil prepared, and let's say you broadcast the seed, and we can talk about appropriate rates as well as we go through this discussion. But once you broadcast that seed, ideally it does need to be covered. And with a tiller or a disc, that becomes a little bit more haphazard. The bottom line is you don't want to bury soybean seed too deep. A commercial soybean farmer is typically going to be tucking soybeans in 1 to 1.5 inches deep, maybe 2 inches. Now, there's some discussion this day about even planting commercial soybeans a little deeper than that, but 1 inch to 1.5 inches is ideal, especially if there's some moisture in the soil. You want to get them tucked in at about that level. Now, again, you're using a tiller or a disc. It's going to be hard to have every seed land at exactly that depth, but the bottom line is don't run that tiller or disc too deep when you're making that pass to cover. In other words, it's probably best just to lower it enough that you're just kind of tickling the soil. And, if you do that, and you might even need to run over the plot a couple of times, but don't put them in too deep because it's essential at the end of the day that soybean seed has contact with moisture and good firm contact with the soil. Another thing, if a fella has access to any kind of a roller, even, some of these small things you could pick up at a farm supply place that someone might roll over a yard or a golf course, you can go out after you've covered it and then just pull a roller of some type to just kind of firm that soil down. Again, that's going to help put that seed in good contact with the soil that surrounds it. and that's going to ensure optimal opportunity for germination. So those would be the starting points.
So working the ground up, is that to make it easier for the soybean to root in?
Yeah. Now, I will add this. It's not unheard of for soybeans to germinate when they're laying on the surface.
Okay.
We see this all the time. You see it in the fall in soybean fields in Mississippi, and I see it here where a combine has gone through the field, harvested the crop, and within a few days of harvest, you get a half inch or 3/4 of rain, and a few days later, you've got soybeans springing to life. There is always, even with the best set machines in the world, there's always some loss behind a combine with soybeans. And you'll see them volunteer prolifically just laying right there on the surface. Now, oftentimes, they're covered by a little bit of old soybean crop residue and so forth. But if they're in contact with the surface of the soil and they get moisture, they can germinate right there on the surface, and the root system will go down and the top growth will go up. Now, that's not ideal, but even if you plant a plot and you get some of your seed covered an inch, some covered 2 inches, and a few are still laying on the surface, as long as there's moisture there, or if you pick up a rain shower, within a few days after the planting, they'll even germinate from the surface. But again, ideal development of the soybean plant, the way the crown of the plant develops, the way the root system orients itself and develops, 1.5 inches is still optimal.
And what about seeding rates per acre when you're broadcasting?
Well, you're going as game plot keepers, planting wildlife food plots with soybeans. You're going to plant at a thicker rate than what we would do commercially. Today, we actually in the commercial world see a marked downtrend in seeding rates. When I was a kid 40 years ago and longer, we used to plant over 200,000, 250,000 seeds per acre.
Wow.
Today, through technology and genetics and good agronomic practices, a lot of farmers south to north are dropping only 120, 140,000 seeds per acre. But in a wildlife food plot setting, you're still going to want to plant them thicker than that. So, you might be looking at 90 or 120 pounds of seed on a per acre basis.
Wow.
And then if your plot is bigger or smaller than that, you just do the math accordingly. But there's nothing wrong in a food plot setting with planting a little thicker. Again, because your depth of placement is not going to be as uniform, which means your germination success and the overall germination rate might not be as high as a commercial grower would see. You want to go high to ensure a good stand. And again, you're planting these soybeans for grazing purposes more than you are for optimal, seed production. So, and I'm kind of spitballing when I say 90 to 120 pounds, but that strikes me as something that would work quite well in a lot of plots where you're incorporating soybeans into that mix.
And on the cover up, so I flatten my disc out and just drop it down a couple inches and run over it, and do the same thing with the tiller?
Yeah. Where if you're using that same disc to prepare the plot initially to work the ground, you're going to be setting those gangs at an angle to aggressively cut and move some soil and work it to a depth. When it comes to covering it, that's absolutely, I should have mentioned that earlier, straighten it out so it's not cutting as aggressively, and then run it shallow just so it's tickling the surface of the soil, and try to run as fast as you can in that setting. And that'll help throw more dirt, and you can do a really good job of getting decent coverage and uniformity of placement by following that rule.
I think you'd be better off to keep it very shallow and actually do the same thing twice if you need to do it evenly, but don't drop it too deep.
Yeah, and
just an inch or two.
Yeah, when my brother-in-law and I plant deer plots in the fall, and we're not planting soybeans then, of course, we're planting other species, but that's what we do. I have an old 7-foot wheel disc, and when we go to cover, we just drop it to where it's just barely touching and run twice. Heck, I've even been known to run over it 3 times, and just to ensure that we're getting nearly all the seed covered, at least to some extent. So nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah, and cultipacking.
Yeah, I know we preach to a lot of our customers, to be careful with that, especially on the smaller seeds. But, when done right, it will work. And with the bigger seeds, it apparently is the way to go.
Yes.
Like
because
I would
they're
want,
larger.
I would think you would want to do that over just running a drag or something over them. That may not bury them deep enough.
Well, and then the without the roller or the cultipacker, the one issue you're going to get into in a lot of places is if you do have a little dry spell, that's going to dry out that top layer of soil so much faster. And if then you lose them. So that's another thing that what he said, using a roller helps a lot.
Yeah. And that's one of the things about soybeans. The worst thing that can happen to them is they start to germinate. A soybean seed will, what we say, imbibe or drink in about 50% of its weight in water. It has to do that in order for the germination process to be triggered. Wow. But if we're in a situation where we plant and it's a little bit on the dry side, or it dries out quickly after planting and that seed is really close to the surface, it begins to swell, it begins to break through the seed coat. But then all of a sudden, if it doesn't have moisture, we don't have a good seal at the surface, that seed will just dry out. It'll desiccate and die on us and never become a contributing plant to the population there.
So here's another issue that I've had and learned the hard way. School of Hard Knocks will teach you, is planting with the drill or the ferminator. Ferminator actually does a pretty good job of this, avoiding this. But like with a regular ag planter made for soybeans, a John Deere brand, and or drill, that if you get we're in the Black Belt Prairie and it's very heavy clay, very fertile, but very heavy clay soils. If you plant that soybean much over an inch or even much at all in that soil and with that technique and get a very heavy, like packing rain, they won't be able to break through. Now, corn and a lot of other stuff, sunflowers even are pretty good, will break through. But the soybeans, sometimes I've even some of our buddies that farm have had to replant like 100 acres, because they didn't get anything to break through the surface. So that's an issue for heavy clay. So I think and you can correct anything I'm saying, but I'm just putting it out there so people don't waste their beans. If it's got a lot of grit and it's sandier, and then it's not as big an issue. But in this stuff, it's just, if it rains and then the sun shines, it's like concrete. And before it can germinate and sprout up. So I'm just wondering if the best technique would be to do, like you said, break it up or till it especially level first. And maybe, you when you broadcast that, just run the roller on it, and then it's with that clay soil, you're not putting it too deep, and plus that clay soil being cultipacked will retain moisture much better than a sandy loam or something. So anyway, that's just long story to get it. I don't want to see people fail in it, and if you get that soybean seed too deep in the heavy clay and get a heavy rain, it's a disaster, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, and what often happens, the seed will germinate, but the process of most legume-type plants like beans, the seed becomes the first two leaves on the plants. Once those come above the surface, we refer to those as the cotyledons. Right. And there is a structure on that soybean plant that looks like an upside-down horseshoe when you look at it underground, and it's pulling those cotyledons up toward the surface. Well, if that hits a brick wall, like a tight clay soil, like you're referring to, what often happens is that thing starts to bend up and point itself toward the surface, and it's thinking about breaking through and reaching for the sunshine. That structure that pulls those cotyledons out of the ground will snap off. Wow. And we refer to that as breaking their necks. So that takes me back to seeding rate again. One of the things you should do if you're dealing with a tougher soil like that, fertile, as you pointed out, but it has a physical, constriction in terms of being heavy, high in clay content, use a higher seeding rate too in those soils, because with a higher seeding rate, you're going to have seeds closer together. And if 2 or 3 soybeans are with a ½ inch or an inch of each other, they will actually work together and they can help each other kind of break through that soil surface. No. Whereas if, in commercial settings today, we're planting beans at such low populations where seeds may be 2, 3, 4 inches apart. And so we don't have neighbors helping neighbors as much in commercial settings as we used to. But again, when I was a kid, you planted them so thick, even in the row spacings of the day, that establishment failures were almost unheard of because they were so thick. The beans were so close together that they would assist one another and break through. But so that's one thing that a game plot manager can do on tougher soils. crank that seeding rate up even more in that setting to give yourself better assurance of getting through the ground, and got to get them up to get them growing. So that would help.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
And they help each other. Have you ever heard of that, Dudley?
No, but when he mentions it, you can almost see it happening.
A little bit.
It's almost like they're pushing a roof up. And then
two of them are pushing instead of one.
Yeah. Think of it as a group of offensive linemen.
Yeah. Pushing that quarterback. They're going to outlaw that, by the way.
Exactly. You're down there on the goal line and trying to get that last yard and get the ball into the end zone, and you have more men on the line, and they're in there closer and tighter together to push through, and that's essentially what soybeans do when the seeds are closer together.
It's fascinating too. The other thing you can speak to maybe is that, and it doesn't really matter, but it's fascinating how you can plant them so thick and soybeans don't have a problem competing with themselves. But you introduce any kind of weed or anything else, it throws it out of balance. It's funny how corn, too, those crops don't seem to have a problem competing with their own type. Is there something to that?
Yeah, it's basically true. Now, you can, when you plant any agronomic crop like soybeans, corn, cotton, super thick, they will compete with each other to some extent. And the way they compete, you'll see that they grow taller when they're spaced closer together, when there's a higher density. But in general, yes, they have an innate quality about them where they know their own kind. And if they emerge together in a uniform pattern with respect to time, they don't have as much trouble. But there is some really interesting biological things that are going on with respect to the quality of light. That if there are weeds in the neighborhood, they literally have an ability to sense that, and yes, that does upend the apple cart more for them than if they're just competing against themselves.
Interesting stuff. So we've got the beans in the ground. Were you planning on putting out? A lot of our folks. May have a 25-gallon spray rig for the back of their four-wheeler, something like that. And we're talking about glyphosate-tolerant beans for the most part. Would you recommend, a lot of these food plots are going to be way weedier than an ag field that's, used, once or twice a year. Are you recommending some type of pre-emergent, or would you just wait until the beans come up and then begin applying your glyphosate over the top?
Well, Dudley, that's a really, really good question. The down and dirty and easiest system is probably to let them come up and see what weeds present themselves and go after them with that glyphosate application. The problem that we increasingly have, and I know you struggle with this in Mississippi, we struggle with it in most states, is that we now have a number of tough weeds that have developed resistance to glyphosate. And you've got some tough customers in your neck of the woods, palmer amaranth, tall water hemp. A lot of these populations now are resistant to glyphosate, so we can't always depend on that alone to control some of the weeds that may come up in our food plots. So, it may not always be economical. I mean, most guys, if they're hunters and they just have some small plots out there, they may not like the sound of going and buying a 2.5-gallon container of a particular herbicide. But if several guys go in together and acquire a product and can share it, they can overcome the economic issues. But a pre-emergence herbicide would be a really, really good idea. And there are a number of chemistries that can be used in soybeans that provide a range of control of various annual grasses and many of the smaller seeded broadleaf weeds. And we always say that a post-emergence herbicide like glyphosate will never fail to control a weed it never sees. In other words, that means if we lay a pre-emergent or a residual herbicide down right after planting, that we prevent a lot of weeds from ever seeing the light of day. And so that takes the pressure off the glyphosate and certainly helps out in situations where there might be resistant weeds lurking. So it's definitely a good idea. We pre-emergent herbicides are the first point of any conversation about weed control in commercial soybeans. And I would say it's fair to have that same conversation with folks trying to manage food plots.
Well, we almost, I feel like we almost owe it to our farmer buddies to control those, your resistant pigweeds and stuff like that.
Yeah, because oftentimes your food plots are in proximity to or in the same neighborhood, so to speak, as commercial soybean acres, and if we have a big escape of some of the weeds, like I've mentioned, that's increasing the seed bank, and those seeds certainly travel. Wildlife, not only deer, but coyotes, all kinds of animals move through food plots. And, if there's a big seed bank produced there, that's getting carried to other places and can put pressure on commercial acres. So it's a good sound policy. Now, when I say pre-emergence herbicides, I'm also, and we talk about glyphosate, I think we're assuming here we're talking about pure stands of soybeans.
Mm-hmm.
If you start to talk about mixing soybeans with other species, to attract animals in, then you have to be more cautious about what herbicides you use. But as long as we're keeping it simple, soybeans only, then you can walk into a local nutrient store there in Mississippi or anywhere in the country, and we've got folks in those at those branches, at those retail locations, who could give you some really good advice on some options that would work very effectively for you.
So, like Twinkie.
Yeah, he'd be a good one. So
he would be.
Tim, let me ask you this: could a guy doing what Dudley just talked about, put down a pre-emerge, could he later then in September find himself maybe having a problem with trying to establish some cereal grains?
No, not at the typical rates of pre-emergent herbicides we're using in soybeans today, especially in the South. It's highly unlikely, and part of that is because those herbicides are generally broken down quite quickly. In fact, we really look for them to deliver about 20 to 40 days of really good control. And then we literally want them to start breaking down, and the use rates we're using with most of them, which would be the same rates that somebody managing a food plot should use, they're going to be almost entirely broken down. And herbicides are broken down different ways. Some are broken down simply by soil moisture. Others are broken down microbially by naturally occurring bacteria in the soil. Some are degraded by UV radiation. Some are degraded, by a multiple of those factors. But typically, with the seasonal annual rainfall amounts that you see in your neck of the woods and in anywhere really east of the Rocky Mountains where soybeans are grown, there's typically enough moisture and enough biological activity during the course of a growing season that if you come back in the fall and want to establish brassicas or cereal grains like rye, oats, wheat, whatever it might be, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. There should be no real major risk of carryover. Now, the one caveat to that would be if you did it and then it just turned off terribly dry, from April to September, and those herbicides didn't break down as well just because of dry weather, then there might be an issue. But that'd be in a minority of cases, I would think.
Yeah. Well, so can you talk to me about the terminal bud? We hear that described a lot, and it sounds like it's very important.
Yeah, as soybeans grow, once they pop out of the ground, the growing point is always at the very top of the plant. And, that seed comes out of the ground, those cotyledons unfold, and then there's a set of two single-lobed leaves that are opposite of each other just above the cotyledons. We call those the unifoliate leaves. And then as each new leaf emerges on the plant, it is a compound leaf. We call it a trifoliate. It's got 3 lobes to it. And every leaf from that point until that plant reaches what we call physiological maturity at the end of the season is going to be a trifoliate. And as one trifoliate opens and expands, just above it is that apical meristem where the next leaf or leaves are being developed. And that's important because if we have a plot out there and our soybeans are just sprouting and they just have the cotyledons open or just the unifoliate leaves, and one night 22 does decide to walk in on that plot and just go to town on it. If they nip those young plants off before they get that first trifoliate, or they nip it off too low, they will have taken off that apical or that growing point, and that plant is done for. The stem may still have life in it, but it's dead and doesn't even know it. But once we get some height on the beans, we get a couple of leaves on them. If they just go in and let's say it's got its first 2 trifoliates, and a deer comes in and nips off the top trifoliate. Well, it's taken off the growing point, but the good news there is that back where the lower trifoliate, where the petiole or the stem that attaches those leaves to the stem, where that attaches to the main stem, there's an infinite number of buds. It's just like pruning a tree or pruning a lot of different plants. At that stage, that plant can still regenerate from those points, and it can start new apical growing points from that point. So, that's the key, or that's one of the paradoxes, I suppose, with soybeans and raising them for deer. We want them to come in and graze, but we don't want them to do it too soon. So right. Some front end protection sometimes is necessary to give those plants a fighting chance to get going. Once they're up, and if we got a good, robust stand and they're growing aggressively, they can stay ahead of the deer. And the deer, by grazing, even from an early stage, can in some cases actually improve the quality, because what they're going to do is they're going to cause those plants to branch. In addition to just a main stem, you're going to have additional lateral branches coming off, and that can actually be a good thing.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that, because I feel like a lot of us just in our minds thought that, if a deer comes and nips the very top of a plant, it just ceases to grow. And so, yeah, I mean, there's other side branches and things like that have buds on them as well, and then they can proceed from there. But when they're real young and they hit those first sets of true leaves, that's when or get that cotyledon, that's when it kills it off.
So, Tim,
exactly.
Tim, we've got a partner in Gallagher Fence. Mm-hmm. So we've Toxie's been messing with them for a couple of years, but we're seeing that this may be the answer to some of these smaller plots.
It may be the only answer.
Yeah,
honestly,
super high density
without building some other structure. It's just way more expensive.
How long would you like to see a guy keep the deer out of a plot to help these soybeans, to help them get established? Is there a certain number of days?
Or a height?
I would say if you could do that for 30 days, and I'm spitballing a little bit there, but, assuming these beans get out of the ground in 5 to 7 days after planting, and you give them 3.5, 4 weeks to grow, they're going to have a few trifoliates on them by the end of that month. And at that point, they should be able to hold their own. Now, anybody who puts a plot out is the one who best appreciates what the deer density is like in an area and knows kind of what to expect in terms of overall pressure. I'd say the higher the pressure, the more of a running start you want to give those soybeans before you would pull the fence back and let them have access. But again, a month would probably be good if you can be successful holding them out that long. And deer are respecters of electric fences. Sometimes it's surprising to me, because a deer, we all know, those rascals can clear a 6 or 7 foot fence if they have their mind to it. But, if you put up an electric fence, and Gallagher obviously makes quality products, whether it's directly energized or solar powered, they do a fantastic job of delivering current. And if you got that thing well grounded, and I think one of the things it's probably good to do is, whether you're using galvanized wire or using poly tape or poly wire to route the current around, I have had some applications where I raise blueberries on my family's old hill farm up in southwestern Indiana, and I have to keep not only birds off of them with netting, but I have to keep raccoons out and deer, because they want to come in and eat blueberries too. But I found that tying some just rags or colorful pieces of ribbon onto that fence is helpful, because what'll happen, deer, like a lot of animals, are curious. And they will walk in and they'll go up and they'll nose whatever you've tied onto that wire. And of course, when they do that, they get, as long as we've got a good ground, they're going to get a shot. And all of a sudden, you've buffaloed them, you fooled them. That you might only have a 3 or 4 foot tall electric fence, but all of a sudden they respect it regardless of its height. So I'm not saying don't build it 7 feet tall, but you might not have to do that. So electricity is an amazing deterrent
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
animals.
Yes, it is.
Gosh,
So-
I hate that stuff.
One point I would make, just again, this is my experience in things, my opinion, but there's not much, it doesn't seem to be, not much more attractive and delicious to deer than a, 4-inch tall soybean or something that just germinated. And I'm sure it's ridiculously, easy to digest and nutritious and everything else too. So I guess the thing about this conversation I want to be sure and tell people is like, that I've learned is like, don't wait and like see that you got a grazing problem to do the electric fence. You better, because once they've tasted that little soybean in there, you're going to really have a tough time keeping them out. That's when they might actually jump over it or whatever. So, but if you put it up ahead
They
of time,
never have a chance to know what's in there.
That's right. They may can smell them, but it's not the same as they've eaten it. But like, I've had a horrible time trying to grow sunflowers, and they're not as succulent as a soybean. But last year we did it, and we used the Gallagher fence, and I did it before any deer got into it or they came up and germinated good, and actually didn't do my full job. I only had like 2 strands. They could have jumped over it so easy, and they didn't touch them because they got popped before they ever got in there. And then once they got popped, they didn't want to try it ever again. So that's my only advice to people is that do it. Get the electric fence. Do what you need to do. Put it up ahead of time. As soon as you plant, of course, you got to keep the weeds from touching it during the course of growing stuff. And then the other thing is timing it. So you're saying at least a month, and I would agree, maybe more. So you better time it. So you need to get those deer eating those things pretty heavily, say by June at the latest.
Yeah.
Because, maybe even May if you could do it, but say June, because you're losing, all the fresh flush of spring, this tender, they can get all kind of native stuff that's pretty good. And that's when it really makes a difference in the heat of the summer. So then you got to plant them, get them up, get 30 days going before you can let them start grazing them. Think about the timing when you plant them and get started early. What's the soil temperature need to be for beans for people?
I'd like to see 50 degrees. It's we talk 50 degrees Fahrenheit for both corn and soybeans. So that's kind of the minimum. If you were, let's say you're out there on a day and you put a thermometer in the ground and it was 48 degrees at 1.5 or 2 inches below the surface, but your forecast is for good weather, warm, sunny days, the soil is going to be rapidly warming, you could go ahead and actually plant at a couple of degrees below 50, but that's really optimal to start at that. And a lot of times food plots are going in. Certainly, in the southern United States, you're easily going to be at that by the time most food plots are planted in April or maybe even out into May. Of course, you might even have some going in. Some may already be in down your way, having been planted in March and so forth. But 50 is really important. If it's 50 degrees or 55 degrees, but your forecast looks really lousy, you got several chilly, cold days coming up, and you anticipate some cold rains, maybe falling, I would hold off and wait until that passes through and the forecast improves. Because one of the other problems for soybeans is not just the temperature alone, but I talked earlier about how they have to drink in 50% of their weight in water for the germination process to be started. If they take in a lot of cold water, that is a real shock to the system. That doesn't mean they won't germinate if the conditions improve, but it's a real shock to their system. So, be patient. If you got a lousy forecast and you're kind of teetering on the edge of that 50 degrees, I'd wait until the weather improves and then do it.
So if a guy doesn't have a thermometer, watching what the nighttime temperatures are, would that be a pretty good indicator of what the soil temperature is?
Oh yeah. If I'm going through the early spring and I'm getting some lows still in the 40s, but my daytime highs are easily 60s, 70s, the sun's out, and down your way, you're going to taste 80s a lot sooner than I do. You're getting weather like that, daytime highs in the 70s, 80s, and holding, well above freezing, 40s, 50s at night. Yeah, you can assume you're at 50 degrees or better.
So it's 86 degrees here right now. So it sounds like we could.
No, that's this time of year.
But
something bad's fixing to happen. We talked about it earlier. It's already
we're not even.
You can go plant some plots.
Our average last frost date, I think, is right about now. What is today's date? The 3rd or the 4th?
Yeah.
We've got a soil temperature map on the Plant Biologic website, but I'm not sure where it is.
Hey, look at your long-term forecast though, because historical stuff you can throw out the window to a degree. I noticed the last I checked there was going to be mid-30s maybe next week one morning.
Yeah.
So
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the beauty of the beans is you can get away with planting them a little bit later. When folks call, I usually tell them, corn is usually first if you were going to do that, and then wait a little bit for the beans. I'm sure the farmers are trying to get them in as early as they can to get the best crop. But let's face it, a lot of us are still turkey hunting and not doing quite as much habitat work. So when is the latest you can plant them, in a dry land scenario?
Even where I'm at in Kentucky, we could get away with, if we had to,
If you had ground
planting
moisture.
soybeans as late as early to mid-July. Now, I'm not recommending that, but you can do it and still get a soybean and easily do that where you guys are, get that plant to what we would call physiological maturity. In other words, it would still have adequate time to make it to the finish line and mature if it's your goal to have plants that actually, do put on pods and seeds and you have some dry forage and grazing opportunities there in the fall and winter. So really a soybean plant needs about, if you're using a variety that's adapted to your locale, your latitude, they typically are going to need about 90 days from the time they come out of the ground until they reach what we call physiological maturity. So 3 months. So if it's early July, August, September, October, and you're not going to have frost. Even where I'm at in the Ohio River Valley, it's rare for us to see much of a frost threat before Halloween anymore. And I know it comes considerably later where you're at. So you could do it that late. Again, if you do find yourself, for whatever reason, getting caught having to put your plots in later in June or maybe even into early July, another thing is, again, push the seeding rate up. Because the later you plant, the less height you're going to get, the less architectural development you're going to get. So what you want to do is you want to compensate for the fact the beans are going to end up being shorter by putting more of them out there. Because you want to get, you still want to get a good mass of leaves because that's the candy that the animals are going to be going after. So
100%.
Increase your seeding rate to compensate for late planting.
That's what we do with brassicas when we can't get them in really early.
Yeah, the only thing about them, be careful. They pull so much phosphorus from the soil. You got to be careful. So, the main benefit to the soybean for sure for deer is the grazing of the leaves. I mean, that's the big plus. The bean pods are incredible if you can, get it to maturity and whatever. But what I was getting at, there's kind of two things: is plant them in time to really feed your deer, really put on extra antler growth. Give them a boost. But then the other thing is just as effective or kind of important, I guess maybe not quite as important, but they're an incredible bow plot if done that way. And you could probably plant all the way to like probably August or something for that if you're not trying to put on a soybean. They would still grow long as, I would think.
Oh, I know people that mix it in with their cool season food plot blends just to give the deer something to munch on before the other stuff gets going.
For example, we sell a tremendous forage soybean here, and they're just amazing. And so they put on so much growth, and they don't yield as much. Obviously, they're bred for great, putting on more leaves. But a stand of those protected by electric fence, get it 3-4 feet tall or more. And then have it where you maybe 3 or 4 weeks or more, by September or so, or low season's October 1st. What I was getting at now, you could, a lot of people hunt ag, and they have active ag, and still deer coming to ag fields then. But far as your place, your hunting club, whatever, I can't imagine anything more, have a better chance of getting a mature deer out into the open in a food plot early bow season than like some green standing soybeans, honestly. And so you could do that, I would think, all the way to August, couldn't you?
Oh, yeah, you could, because there you're not really worried about them reaching maturity. You're just looking for grazing. And, obviously we see soybeans. Sometimes we'll have some being harvested as early as late August or certainly early September. And you'll see volunteers coming up after we get a little rain. And those beans may be out there growing for 30, 45 days before that first killing frost comes. Sometimes those fields will be really green. And you will see deer in the fall out there on volunteer soybeans sometimes when they spring up soon enough. So absolutely. I'm already thinking that, my brother-in-law and I have not done that in his winter food plots that we've planted, but we're typically putting those in mid-August. I think this fall when we do it, I'm gonna recommend that he include some soybeans with it for the reasons we just been talking about here.
So I know a lot of the agricultural varieties, they want them to go ahead and mature so they can get them out of the field before the, fall and winter gets here. We've tweaked our beans to where, we're trying to get them to mature later than normal.
Right.
So, they don't start browning up until, later on.
Maybe even the first frost almost.
But they are still an ag bean and are made, for heavy seed production. We're just trying to toe that line. And I think we've done a pretty good job with that.
So could you speak to explain the difference in forage beans and regular ag beans?
And then we need to get into the group stuff as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Group.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. If you look at the history of soybeans in the United States, they were first grown in the first half of the 20th century for forage.
Silage and forage.
And silage and hay and things of that nature. My late father remembers as a boy, they raised soybeans and they were expressly raised for cutting for hay. Now, they were hard to cure and put up as hay, but again, they were raising them because, the protein value and they were fairly palatable. But anybody planting a food plot could go and access typical commercial soybean varieties that a grower would plant. But I too am a fan, just like you fellows are, of the forage types. And you mentioned that you have one there that's really ideally suited to that. The forage types tend to get taller. I know some of those will get 6-7 feet tall if they have enough time. They tend to have more leaves. They develop more nodes along the main stem, and the leaves, each leaf or trifoliate arises from those nodes. So, with something for grazing, that's what you want. You're looking for maximal leaf production. There's a lot of protein in those leaves. And so, really, it's ideal to choose a forage type bean for a wildlife food plot.
I remember some of those older varieties, Dairy, Donegal, Tyrone, I think is where a lot of those forage varieties
Lamar
came from.
I remember old Lamar soybeans is what everybody planted here.
If you can find some, the old stories, on the internet, some people just found old silos that had just a few beans in it still, and a few of them were viable, and they brought them back. It's a pretty neat story.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just wondering about the other question is, how much, I know the big push and, Monsanto and Roundup Ready and the age we're in today, but you're in the middle of that industry. How much, I know some people are farming non-Roundup Ready, was it Liberty Link? I mean, what are some of the other, types of, beans or herbicide applications for those that are going on? Is anything of consequence out there much beyond Roundup Ready?
Yeah, Roundup Ready was what got it all started. Of course, a trait put into soybeans, introduced back in 1996, I think was their first year on the market, and transgenically modified to be tolerant to glyphosate herbicide. Now, since then, we've gone through a period of time where we've added other traits. And we do have the Liberty Link trait, or a trait which makes those soybeans tolerant of the herbicide called glufosinate. That is the active ingredient that's found in Liberty, or the newest version of Liberty that's out on the market is called Liberty Ultra. But we also had, for a time, soybeans that were tolerant to dicamba herbicide.
Yes.
But the problem, you may have heard, we went through several years of using dicamba traded beans, but the problem with dicamba, despite best efforts, is it's a herbicide that after you apply it, it can be a quite volatile compound.
Yep.
And we were having issues in our industry with that herbicide getting up and walking out of the field where it was applied, so to speak, and moving down range and
killing
getting
my
on
tomatoes,
soybeans that didn't have the dicamba trait, or getting on non-target vegetation. So EPA pulled the plug on that technology a couple years ago. Now, however, we do have soybeans that are really on a majority of acres today across the United States that are tolerant to 2,4-D. And those are generally sold under the branding platform of Enlist. And that is, 2,4-D is a much less volatile compound than dicamba. And so the Enlist beans have kind of come forward the last couple of seasons and are dominating the marketplace. Now, most Enlist beans have multiple tolerances. They also have tolerance to glyphosate, and in many cases glufosinate as well. So you can use a variety of herbicides on them, and that gives you, more options for controlling resistant weeds.
Yeah,
That's great. Yeah, because there's a lot of, horse nettle and pigweed and thespania, and there's a bunch of stuff here.
Out there.
When you spray Roundup, there's a bunch of stuff left if you don't. So that's fascinating. And I would suspicion that the 2,4-D, it's a very be careful with chemical. I use it. But I would think it's also, for me, it's one of the cheapest ones out there. You maybe $2 an acre, maybe $3, something like that. Most of the time, and if you buy it in volume, it's probably even less. So it's probably more effective efficient wise, cost wise, I would think. Then we certainly would never touch any dicamba here.
If you're going to use 2,4-D, you're probably going to have to resort to using a commercial soybean variety. You can tell me and update me if I'm wrong. While I know there are forage varieties of soybeans that carry the Roundup Ready trait, I don't know if any of those forage varieties carry the trait for 2,4-D tolerance. So if that was important, if that was important to you, you'd probably have to rely on a commercial soybean variety that offers that trait. The other thing is, keep in mind, if you were using 2,4-D, really any of the post-emergence herbicides or even glyphosate, we sell products in our retail industry called adjuvants that are designed to help, produce the right size particles to reduce spray drift, off-target movement, and that sort of thing. So, if you're you're out there using a small sprayer behind an ATV or something, you can use and incorporate those adjuvants as well to help keep that herbicide right there on target where you want it applied.
Well, so Tim, real quick, could you kind of explain the whole the soybean groupings?
Yeah. And I don't want to get too deep in the weeds and leave your podcast audience scratching their heads over what I'm talking about. But at the core of that conversation, soybeans are what we call a photo period responsive crop. They grow and they develop and they move into the reproductive period. That means start blooming and setting pods in response to the balance of day length and night length. And actually, it's the length of night that determines when that shift occurs. Plant has to reach a certain number of accumulated hours of darkness to be triggered to move from its vegetative stage into darkness. And so, obviously, that length of day and night balance is very different from the Gulf Coast up to International Falls, Minnesota. In the north, we have much shorter nights and longer days in the middle of summer. You get down on the Gulf Coast, you've got a more even distribution between daylight and dark. So soybean varieties, if I took a variety from Minnesota and brought it here to Kentucky, or certainly took it to Minnesota or to Mississippi, and planted it there, it would want to bloom about 2 days after it came out of the ground. Vice versa, if I took a variety from Mississippi that's adapted to your latitude and took it to Iowa or Minnesota, it would never want to bloom. It would just stay vegetative all year. So soybean varieties are grouped into what we call maturity groups, and those run from we have double zeros, for example, that would be grown up, on the Canadian border, southern Canada, and then all the way down to about maturity groups 7 and 8 that would be down in your neck of the woods and further south. So it's important, whatever soybean you grow, whether you're doing it commercially or raising it for a food plot, if you want it to produce blossoms and pods and seeds and reach maturity, then it's important that you have use a maturity group that is adapted within a range of latitudes in your neck of the woods. Now, that would be less critical, for example, in food plots, because you're not necessarily trying to produce seed. In fact, if you kept it vegetative longer, that might actually be an advantage. So it's like I say, it's not as critical, but it's still, if you're trying to get the plant to reach a certain height and achieve good architecture and offer a lot of biomass for the animals to graze on, you're still going to want to use one that's adapted to your neck of the woods.
See these people? When the clock strikes 5, it's not the end. It's just the beginning. They have to do these things. They have to do those things. Enter the all-new LS Tractor MT2 and MT2E, a relentless force of innovation. Redesigned with a new hood and cab built for comfort and visibility, with enhanced lifting capacity to get the job done. Making these people the ones everyone else calls those people. Visit your local LS Tractor dealer today.
Lanny, we're always in here. We always have these interesting guests, and you're always on your computer. What's up?
I'm looking at Onyx the whole time. I love the app, but I love the desktop too.
My favorite thing is Bobby doesn't know how to shut his computer down, so I can go in there and share his pins to my account.
That's what you were doing in there this morning.
Yep.
Back during deer season, I shot a couple of big bucks.
Of course.
As I'm looking for them, I can turn on this tracking feature, and I can see where I've looked.
And I use that feature too for spreading seed, spreading fertilizer, spraying. It really keeps you on track.
Onyx is a great company. Look, we know Jared. They're hunters,
they
just
are.
like we are.
Yes,
so they're
no
serious
doubt
about
about
this. The way they've designed this thing, a hunter and a gamekeeper can take advantage of it and make their property better.
Use coupon code Mossy Oak to save 20% off of your Onyx subscription.
Yeah, and Mac, you shouldn't do that now. Richie, you got to help me. Okay.
Hey y'all, Jim Ronquist here with Drake Waterfowl and Old Tom Turkey Products, talking about some of the new lineup for this spring. One of the more popular is the SWT collection, or Spiderweb Technology. This is a highly breathable micro-vented stretch fabric for maximum silent mobility with a durable water-repellent finish that'll keep you cool and keep you dry and keep you going in the spring woods. Be sure and check it out at a dealer near you or drakewaterfowl.com/oldtom.
Your brain.
Well, he actually kind of addressed what I was. It's like, maybe, since we don't necessarily want beans or pods, would it make sense to put a different group down here so it stayed in the vegetative state the whole time?
Have you guys ever driven around? I'm looking at you too, Tim. That sometimes, like in the Delta, you might see a big soybean field, and there might be a security light out on a pole, and you'll notice all the beans start turning colors except right there around
because
the
the
pole.
photo period.
I guess it's because that light's staying on at night.
Interesting.
Yeah, that light makes that plant think that it's daylight all the time. So it never reaches that critical threshold of darkness. So it just stays vegetative, stays green, doesn't want to mature. Mm-hmm. That's exactly the reason why you see that. You'll see that, around parking lots and anywhere you have a dusted on light or something that's on all night.
Yeah, our
so
goal
we could just
with
put a light in all the food plots.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, it would come on at night.
That'd be great.
And it would make them nocturnal.
And
it'd
make
them daylight.
Easier. You could see your stand. You can get be
easy
safer.
to get in there.
Oh,
Would be safer.
yeah, you wouldn't hunt at night, would you, Bobby?
Bobby
No.
wouldn't.
Oh my goodness.
That's pretty good.
I think the goal with our soybean, the game changer forage soybean, is it's going to be a big plant, lots of leaf area, but it's also going to produce a good seed crop. We're trying to hit that happy medium. If you can keep your deer from eating all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the priority is the foliage too, first and foremost, but it could very well, if in the right conditions, put that pod on too, which would be incredible.
Well, the Juries, the Lindsays, those guys are really good up there in the Midwest at having standing corn, standing beans, and then a green,
green to green.
That's right.
And then if you and to kick it up a notch, if you can catch your beans in that stage where they're about to dehiss and drop their leaves, you can fling some cereal grains, clovers, brassicas out into that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the ultimate would be to have, beans that hadn't shattered on the top of the plant and then green down below.
Where the foliage covered it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
That would,
Exactly.
We should
it
do that.
literally would, he's right. It would be the best food plot on the planet.
Yeah. In fact, that is how some commercial farmers establish cover crops. Is have seed flown on, whether it's standing soybeans or corn. Do it before the leaves drop, and then when those leaves do turn brown and drop, oftentimes that provides enough coverage, especially if you get a few light rains in there. It's just perfect to stimulate germination of clovers and brassicas and various cover crops. It behaves the same way if you're doing that in a food plot. So it's a nice kind of transition where you can go right out of a summer plot into a winter plot and not even have to do any soil disturbance. You can just use the leaf drop to get your winter cover crop started. And like you say, the most critical thing that you're chasing is that leaf material for grazing of those green beans during the growing season. But if you do have some pods that mature and are hanging on up there in the top of the plant, keep in mind, again, as I said it early on in the discussion, the seed is also very high in energy. It's about 20% oil content. And of course, by the time you go into fall and winter, you've basically, that animal's got its rack developed, but it's going into a season where it's going to start to get colder. It needs more energy.
Yes, it does.
And mature soybean seeds are going to help to supplement that need.
For sure. Yeah.
I said the wrong thing. I said dehiss. I meant to say senesce.
Oh,
I thought, Dudley, that maybe you had invoked a new term that I hadn't heard of. I wondered
he's
what
done
you
that.
meant
He's done that before.
hiss.
I think dehiss is the seed popping open.
I wasn't going to correct because I thought, well, maybe you guys use some terminology that I hadn't been around before. But
we definitely use terminology.
I appreciate you clearing that up.
I was just
senesce is the word.
I was just trying to be cool, and I failed.
It's
it was
okay.
Senesce.
I said I pronounced Mississippi with an R the other day. So.
Tim, let me ask this. Let me get back to the business here. So if I'm an average food plot planter and I'm thinking about planting soybeans, but in this fall, I'm going to come back with one of our, biological Patch Plus or something. Are there any benefits to the soil? Are these soybeans going to help build my soil at all?
Yes, and actually, we ought to talk about that benefit from two angles. First of all, soybeans, they being a legume, they have a really interesting relationship with a bacteria in the soil that goes by the Latin name of Rhizobium japonicum. And they have one of these quid pro quo or symbiotic relationships where those bacteria come and set up shop on the surface of the soybean roots. And what the soybean plant does, it exudes sugars and carbohydrates through the root system that provides energy to that bacteria. And then what that bacteria does, it forms nodules on the roots. And inside those nodules, those bacteria are taking nitrogen gas out of the soil pore space and converting that ultimately into ammonium nitrogen, which the soybean plant or all higher green plants need ammonium nitrogen to drive their metabolic processes that results in growth and development and so forth. So soybeans, because they are high in protein, that means that we have to manufacture a lot of amino acids to build the proteins, and it takes a lot of nitrogen to build amino acids. Now, the beauty with the soybean plant is it manufactures most of its own needs through that really cool process in the soil, biologically speaking. Now, at the end of the season, quite often, there is still substantial amount of nitrogen left in the soybean tissue. So as that does dry down, as that senesces and lands on the surface, or even the roots below the soil, will give a nitrogen contribution to any subsequent winter cover crops that you might plant, especially if you're putting a small grain in there, whether that would be wheat or oats or something like that. Those grass type crops need nitrogen, and in their case, we have to supply that either with residual nitrogen left over in something like a soybean, or we need to supply it with maybe a little dose of nitrogen fertilizer. So yes, there is very clearly a nitrogen benefit in particular from those soybeans. And of course, there's going to be some other nutrition in that soybean plant. They take up a considerable amount of phosphorus and potassium. Some of that would leave a commercial field in the form of the seed. And of course, some of it's walking out of a deer plot during the summer in the animals as they're grazing.
Yeah,
but to the extent that there's still a lot of biomass left out there, as that material breaks down, nutrients out of that tissue is going to be recycled back into the system and available for a winter cover crop, conceivably.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So obviously, we know that the nitrogen is the most volatile of those top 3 nutrients in fertilizer. So how much of that might, if you had dry matter left and whatever, disk it in the ground, would it last till the next growing season, add to the soil nitrogen, or is it kind of so volatile you lose it?
Well, and it's more than just volatility. We can lose nitrogen, certain forms of nitrogen, if they're left on the surface, we can lose it via volatility. Most nitrogen exists in the soil in what we call the nitrate form, which is a negatively charged molecule, and our soils are negatively charged. So, we know what happens when we have 2 like charges. They repel each other. And nitrogen, if you get a lot of rain in the nitrate form, tends to leach out of the system. And or sometimes if we get excessive rain and we have the soil ponded or waterlogged for several days, we can also lose nitrogen to a process called denitrification, where it actually turns back into a gas, bubbles up to the surface, and escapes off into the atmosphere, where it actually, in that stage, becomes a pretty potent greenhouse gas. But so nitrogen, I've always said it's the Harry Houdini of the nutrient world. It's a great escape artist. And if you haven't had excessive rains and a pretty good growing season, you can kind of assume that you've got a decent contribution. If you've had a lot of rain, a good bit of it's probably gotten away from you. And, you could go to the expense of pulling some soils samples and check to see what's there. But, there's a cost associated with that, especially if you're just doing that for a food plot. Right. So, you're probably going to need, if you've got cover crops out there that need nitrogen, they need nitrogen to encourage growth, you're probably going to need to add some supplemental and not be able to depend solely on that contribution coming, say, from soybeans.
You could save a little bit of nitrogen by throwing some deer radish over the top and letting the radish roots scavenge the nitrogen, and then they rot that winter and leave the nitrogen on the surface.
They leave more than just the nitrogen, I think, too.
Yeah. And that's a good point. The tillage radishes, popular both in food plots and certainly in some cover crop settings. And to your point, yes, that big old honking radish, which in a good deep soil with that offers a good rooting environment, those rascals can go down there nearly 20 inches or 2 feet. And what they're doing while they're growing is, they're scavenging a lot of nutrients. They're taking up nitrogen. They're also very, very effective scavengers of phosphorus. And what they do is they help pull that nutrient that may have moved deeper into the soil profile. They actually help pull it back up closer to the surface. Wow. Then as that radish decays, to your point, it's put those nutrients back in position where most of the roots of your other plants are growing. So they're effective scavengers and recyclers of nutrients.
Yeah, and I would think that would really help, like the bacteria and the microbes, which we hear a lot about. It's such a big factor. Of course, the average food plot guy doesn't have a clue about that, and most people, other than the best farmers and people like yourself. But I would think the decaying matter from the radish root would be awesome at putting that back in the soil. Decaying
plant material. I mean, bacteria are the number one community of microorganisms that are responsible for breaking those residues down and helping to recycle those nutrients back into the soil solution, or the soil water, so to speak. And yes, their numbers and their reproduction are driven by the presence of material like that. So, you said earlier, average person may not know this or even appreciate it, but I don't know if you fellows are aware, but a teaspoon of soil typically has anywhere from 100 million to a billion microorganisms in it.
Wow.
And
That's incredible.
think about that. It the soil isn't just clay and sand and silt particles. It's teeming with microbial life, and it's that microbial community that has a very close relationship with the roots of the plants we're growing, whether that's in a deer plot or out in a cotton field or a soybean field. And they directly affect plant growth. They affect nutrient cycling and the overall health and quality of the soil. So,
and the wildlife.
Yeah, exactly.
Dudley, why don't we ask him some rapid fires?
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm all about a rapid fire.
Questions. We probably need to.
I've got a couple in here that we need to know the answer to.
Let's go.
Let's do it.
And look, rapid fire, Tim, you'll be excited about this.
Yes.
Rapid fire is brought to you by our friends at Nutrien Ag Solutions.
That's right. Each week.
Okay. All right, Mr. Tim. Are you ready for some rapid fire questions?
I am as ready as I probably ever will be.
All right. All right. Soybeans or rice?
Soybeans.
Soybeans or cotton?
Soybeans.
Soybeans or corn?
Soybeans.
What's worse, heavy clay or really sandy for soybeans?
Depends on the situation. Neither.
Okay, I like it.
Both. Both.
What's better, high CEC or high organic matter?
High CEC.
All right. Is calcium to magnesium ratio important for beans?
Can be.
Inoculate every time?
Yes.
Pick a pH, 6.4 or 7.2 for beans.
6.4.
What is your least favorite soybean pest?
Stink bugs.
And last but not least, are you going for forage all summer or dry beans all winter?
Both.
Yeah.
Good answer.
That may be my favorite one.
That is the most technical rapid fire we've ever
so
had.
much better
What
than
is
sardines and
CEC?
pork and beans.
Huh?
What's CEC?
Cation exchange capacity.
I thought that's what it was. I just wanted to be sure you knew what it was.
Well, I mean, high organic.
I'm gonna. I say CEC because you get down in your part of the world and my part of the world, we don't really have what we call high organic matter soils. But we do have variance between sands and silts and clays in CEC, and the higher the CEC, the better the soil can hold on to nutrients. So, we're never in Mississippi or Kentucky. I mean, in some no-till settings, some really good soils, we may be able to get organic matter over 3%. But we're never going to be like the folks up in northern Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa that have these 4 and 5 and higher organic matter soils. So that's why I say CEC. You could probably also get some debate on my answer about
pH.
The pH 6.4, 7.2. 6.4 is a little closer. It's a little bit on the headed toward the low end of optimum for soybeans. But I'd rather be there than be over the neutral point, which is 7. I'm still going to probably have more total nutrient availability to soybeans at a 6.4 pH than I am at 7.2. So that's why I answered that. You might get other agronomists who would disagree with that.
Well, that's
answer.
why I didn't say 6.8 or 6.7 because you would have said that for sure.
You gave me enough range there to feel comfortable.
We're
gonna learn a lot from these Nutrien folks.
This guy is so smart. He is.
So
can you come down when we plant?
When people call me,
I tell you what, Bobby graciously agreed to host me if I could have made it down and done this live with you fellows, and I really would like to have done that. But I've got some things on my plate that just didn't allow enough time for me to make a run to Mississippi. But I don't know. I'm just going to unashamedly kind of wiggle in and say, hey, I'd still like that grand tour sometime.
All right. We can make that happen.
Yeah.
Well, when you're not getting 4,000 phone calls a day, that may be a better time. And I bet this is a tough time for you. And we really appreciate you coming on this time of year.
We do.
Hey, before we
My pleasure, fellas. I really enjoyed it. It was the privilege was all mine. Do appreciate it.
Yeah, well, before we let you go, just real quick, Richie, let's give away a prize. We want to ask you a trivia question that's not nearly as smart as what Dudley just asked
that
you.
was some serious
Let's
rapid
try
fire.
this real quick.
All right, this week's winner is Let 'em Walk.
Let them walk.
Let 'em Walk, left a review. So if you want a chance to win, leave a review.
What'd he win?
Nukem
blind. Boy, we have some Nukums around
That's
here.
a handy blind. You can
it
just
is.
throw that in the back seat of your truck.
NukemHunting.com.
Yep.
NukemHunting.com.
NukemHunting.com. All right, so here we go, Mr. Tim.
Yes.
Where are soybeans thought to have originated from?
China.
Man, he kills it.
There you go.
That didn't take long.
No.
That was a rapid fire.
That was like what? That was the definition of split second.
I've always liked the scientific name of soybeans.
What is it?
And I may be pronouncing it wrong, but glycine max.
Ah.
You got it. You got it. You get an A+ for your pronunciation.
Dudley over
That's
here
better.
showing out.
Thank you, Mr. Know-It-All.
Yeah.
I had to
Yeah.
There
make
it
up
is.
for my messed up word earlier.
That's right. Yeah, glycine max. You have recovered. That's a lot better than hiss.
Yeah.
Hey, he would fit right in, guys, for sure. You know, Bobby, it's every now and then, not every time we do this, that we go way over our time, and it's because, and I'm just saying this for so you can appreciate this. It's someone they're so good, and the way they present themselves also. But the information is so good, I could just listen to them talk all afternoon.
It goes
me
by.
too.
in a
And
hurry.
I looked up. I couldn't believe how long we've been doing this because I could just sit there and listen. Every question is fielded so well,
Yeah.
and it's a topic that is so near and dear to a Gamekeepers.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, I really appreciate that. You guys are too kind, but it's been fun.
Well, come
thanks
see
for
us
being here.
sometime.
Yeah, well, we're going to do it again. Tim.
Bobby's
Yeah.
Bobby's going to make sure.
Yeah. We got
Standing
you.
invitation.
Well, guys, just
Appreciate it.
This look, if you paid attention, you could learn a lot from
Learn
this.
a lot from this
And
one. That's right.
one of the questions I had you answered, I was going to ask about inoculating. So if you're new to this, if the ground's never had soybeans, definitely you would say inoculate.
Yep.
Yes. Most soils, where we grow soybeans or have any history of soybean production, do have what we call native levels of that bacteria that I mentioned earlier. But especially if you're picking a site that's never had soybeans or has not had any recent history, a good inoculant on the seed is a good idea. And obviously, we sell some excellent inoculants for soybeans through Nutrien Ag Solutions, but the quantity that, the package size might not be conducive to a guy who's planting a 1 acre plot, because the smallest package we would have of our most popular inoculant product treats a lot more units of soybeans than a guy just doing his own plot would. But if you had a group of guys, or you were treating a quantity of seed that was being distributed out to several guys planting plots, that product would still be an option. But you can also go into garden centers and go through various mail order sources, or
absolutely,
probably go. And also, you can also find some inoculants that are sold in smaller quantities that still fit the needs of a gamekeeper.
So is the inoculant used for like clover the same bacteria as the inoculants for soybeans, or are they different?
No, that's a really good question, and no, the species. The species that inoculate the different legumes, they're closely related. You might think of them as cousins, but the one that would inoculate clover is not the same as the bacteria that inoculates soybeans. And in fact, there have been farmers that have made that mistake before. For example, alfalfa, queen of the forage crops in North America. It's a different bacteria that inoculates it. And in fact, I have seen situations where a guy planted soybeans after a field had been in alfalfa for several years, and they thought they didn't need to inoculate, and the soybeans almost were devoid of nodules. They were nitrogen starved.
Wow!
And it was because they didn't understand that. And so, but that goes back to our rapid fire question. Inoculants are good, inexpensive insurance. And even if you have a recent history of soybeans in an area, putting a good commercial inoculant on the seed is still a good idea, because those inoculants feature superior strains of that bacteria. They're better at doing the job than the native bacteria already found in the soil. So they still bring something additional to the game beyond what's already there.
Wow. Well, Tim Sickman, you have represented Nutrien well.
Yeah, I'm
You have
excited to
answered all
Yeah.
our questions.
Yeah, it has.
Dudley is
Well, and we really appreciate. I only learned recently about this relationship between our company and yours, and of course, as you know, there are countless folks throughout the Nutrien organization, from among our executive leadership team on down through to our retail stores, our applicators, our crop consultants, our sellers. A lot of people are big Mossy Oak fans, avid hunters, sportsmen, and so our organization really appreciates you, your company, and what you do on behalf of hunters and sportsmen everywhere. And again, it's been a privilege to be with you today.
Well, thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
That might be the
Likewise.
nicest thing somebody's ever said to us.
Right back at you.
There you go. Thank you.
wow.
New favorite human alert.
Yeah.
All right, Tim. We've enjoyed it. Guys, I'm looking around the room. This is information packed.
Super good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is. So guys,
Call us. We got a great soybean for you too.
Yeah, they're shipping
We
out
really do.
right now. Matter of fact.
they're smoking out
the
here.
door.
So
yep.
now's the time to get ready.
Yep. All right. The spring issue is in the mail. So
Yep.
if you don't have one, go to Tractor or Bass Pro or somewhere and you can pick one up. I don't know why you don't subscribe. It's a great magazine. Tim, we'll put you on the comp list so you can start getting our Gamekeeper magazine.
Yep.
Fantastic. I look forward to it.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Stay safe next couple of days. I mean, by the time this airs, that'll be over with. But stay safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need to get back to building the ark.
Yeah. I hope not. But
You
good
know, I
luck.
think there's a guy in Kentucky that's already
There's
built
got
one.
one. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's got one. I think people are probably over there trying to
They
lease
sure
that
are.
and get that moved.
Save room for some animals.
Ticket price is going up.
Yeah, that's good. Richie, thank you for paying attention this whole when you've been over there.
Try to do
Killing
what
it,
I try to do what I
Richie.
can.
You
You
did
killed it,
good.
Richie.
Yeah.
He didn't
He never went to sleep.
No.
he
It was
showed
tough
up
one.
at
I
the
couldn't. I
time.
couldn't.
a
I
tough
couldn't fall. Yeah, tough one to fall asleep on.
We changed his chair. It's not as comfortable over
There you
there.
go.
So.
All right.
Why don't you say goodbye, Dudley?
Goodbye, Dudley.
Get us out of here, Richie.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Gamekeeper Podcast, and be sure to tune in again. Subscribe to Gamekeeper Farming for Wildlife magazine, and don't miss the Mossy Oak Properties Fistful of Dirt podcast with my good buddy, Ronnie Cuz Strickland.